So, hello, I'm Jan Čelák. I'm on the program committee, and I will be running this last session as well. So this session will include short lightning talks. We have 5 speakers. The first 3 presentations will be rather short, only 5 minutes. The last 2 will be longer, will be 10 minutes. It will be only strictly the time limit. You have to keep it. Ralph will be handling the time and will indicate when you run out of time. If you want the audience to ask questions, please make sure it fits into your 5 or 10 minute slot. But after the time is up, the speakers will change. And that's it. With that, first talk will be by Paul Hoffman on Identifier technology health indicators. Please, Paul.
You missed the big red, please contribute. Which is really what this is about. I'm not going to give a background on ITHI. Many of you know it. Actually, I'll give you a brief background, but really what we're asking for is contributions. So ITHI it's a set of metrics and measurements. It's not anything that actually relates to health. We are not determining what is good health or bad health for DNS. There's a URL there so that you can take a look at what we're doing. Many of these measurements actually are coming from y'all. For some value of y'all, authoritative, some of the authoritative server folks are giving us some metrics, root servers and such like that. So, and to be really clear, the data that we collect and distribute does not contain any personally identifiable information. So if you share with us, you can see what you're sharing. You will see that in fact it has no PII in it. We only want statistics so that we can redistribute. The whole purpose of ITHI is not for us to say what is good health and bad health, but to allow researchers who want good sets of data, especially data over time, and if they have some opinion about this data means good health or bad health, that's great. So the little diagram down there shows that in fact we give you a tool to do statistics, and that comes to us. We do some analysis, we will do some combining, some blinding and such like that, but no naming and shaming. So here ITHI currently has 8 sets of metrics. The one that I'm actually really discussing here is the one that's labeled M4, which is recursive server analysis. We take summaries of, from you, how many queries did you have of certain types and such like that. Again, not PCAPs at all, not request lists. So as you can see in the right-hand column, we get the data for the bigger picture from lots of folks, but for M4, we need recursive resolver operators to look at their traffic and send it. So last slide, how you can contribute. Right now, M4 has a pitifully small number of recursive resolvers, so it's not really representative of anything. We would love to have it be more representative because, in fact, some people might say, oh, good, you've got recursive, data from recursive resolvers. We think this would mean good health or bad health, and they'll look and they'll see, that it's only a couple of them. So please get in touch with Alain Durand. There's his email address. We do show you exactly what we collect. So in fact, you can see both what you're sending to us and how we process it. We don't show you individuals for any of the other folks. So it really is you've got some data, you've seen what we collect, please, send it to us, and then it just becomes automatic after that. So that's it for my very brief advertisement, unless somebody has specific questions, which I suspect they don't. Oh, and I'm wrong, yes.
Rubens Kivnik.pr. There is a call for contribution here, but there are some methodology flaws that have been pointed out repeatedly in the ICON community, and ICON still hasn't fixed that. So my warning is that people are not that willing to contribute while those are not fixed. And while you mentioned that there is no naming and shaming, sometimes there are classifications that look generalized but are actually naming and shaming, like new GTLDs versus legacy GTLDs. So
I think that's not true for this data set,
No.
but I'm not completely sure. And so for those kind of comments, before I get shut off, which I think is fine, definitely contact Lon. And quite frankly, if we're
we
not,
have already done so. And
Okay.
what I'm relaying to you is that it didn't work. So
Okay.
what happens is people won't contribute because you keep not doing that.
okay, noted. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul. If you have more questions, you will find Paul in the hallway track. And the next speaker is Jaromír Talíř from CZNIC, and he will talk about their DOH server.
Okay, if you were here for IDS 2 days ago, you may have heard the talk from my colleague Maciej Anzinski about the DNS anomaly detection, and he particularly mentioned that the CZNIC is running open DNSSEC validating resolver. We are operating that for about 10 years, and it has been using Unbound. It was deployed on our .cz unicast, so it was around the world, and we had also one unicast in Prague. There's you can see the URL where more information about the ODVR. People were using that. We didn't know how much until there was the big Google public DNS outage in November 2016, where suddenly we saw this spike of the traffic. So it's people started to use it when the Google public DNS was unreachable. So it's not worthless to at least to operate that. A few weeks ago, we decided to do major restructuring of this ODVR. We prepared a new hardware, new servers that are currently only in Czech Republic, because we saw that the percentage of usage in foreign locations is dropping, and it's actually make us more trouble to operate it elsewhere. And we used the new IP addresses outside of .cz unicast, so we do not put the .cz in the danger in case there is some issues with ODVR. And most interesting is that we installed on these servers latest version of not resolver. So this is to me one of the best things, because we really would like to take advantage of that. We have the sysadmins, the real people, operators that are trying to operate some real stuff, and the developers of the software. So the same that I've been talking about yesterday about how not DNS authoritative developers are working together with sysadmins on the not operations, that now we are not resolver people are working on the operations of the real public facing resolver. And we were able to use the features of latest version of not resolver, which is DOT and DOH. DOH is something that Petr Špaček wrote probably overnight, I think, that's roughly, and it's based on the Lua HTTP module. So he insists to mention that it's experimental implementation, and that's probably maybe not for production use. And definitely we thought that it would be probably a better approach to have some HTTP proxy in from the DNS server, and it was another, to me, good example that 2 days ago in the evening that we were sitting with NSD people and ISC people in the food court having this chunk beer, and they were immediately trying to find out a way how to work collaboratively on the way how to proxy the HTTP to the DNS server. And but for us, one particular interesting point is that we used to have something called DNSSEC validator, and this was the plugin to browser which included a binary blob with Unbound. And at one point of time, the browser stopped to allow us to do update of this plugin because of this binary blob. And unfortunately, we realized that this browser plugin has also hard-coded trust anchor. So we were not able to upgrade it, and when the root key was rolled, that the plugin stopped working. So we thought maybe that to having DOH as a way how to outsource the DNSSEC validation of our plugin into some other part would be interesting, because it's quite easy to get the information from via DO from the validating resolver. So yeah, these are URL and the address of our ODVR. So if you like, you can test it. You can give us some feedback about anything what you think about that, or maybe the feedback about if you would still use the DNSSEC validator plugin in case this would be the validation would be done by DOH. That's maybe for us also interesting answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaromír.
May I have a comment? Just for the
Just a quick
DNSSEC
comment.
validator, if there is anyone who used that, please note that the new version is not doing any validation whatsoever, and it doesn't check any TLSA certificates and records, because there are no APIs anymore in the browsers. So it's just, nice icon.
Cool. Thank you. So the next speaker is Brian Hartvigsen from Cisco OpenDNS, and he will talk about DNSCrypt.
Hey. All right, so I literally wrote this talk this morning, and good luck to me. All right, so there's been a few times that people have brought up DNSCrypt, not only at this OARC meeting, but at others. And everyone's vision and view of DNSCrypt is a little different, so I thought I would go through. Here's what our view kind of is on it. So for those of you who don't know anything about DNSCrypt, so you've got to start with DNSCurve. DNSCurve was proposed by DJB June of 2009 as a way to, obviously, to encrypt the DNS in resolver to authority communications using elliptic curve cryptography and all kinds of other fun stuff. He saw it as kind of a better way of doing data authentication in a way. It's kind of weird. His view on it is a little weird, in my opinion. But never really saw a lot of adoption. OpenDNS adopted DNSCurve in July of 2009, thanks to the work of Matthew Dembski, who, if you don't know that name, he's the guy who actually collected the $10,000 from DJB for finding the first vulnerability in the DJB suite. But no one else, as far as I'm aware, ever adopted DNSCurve. No major support for it in any other open source or other platforms. And in fact, in 2017, even we turned it off because literally no one was using it other than one website, and it actually stopped responding to encrypted queries, so it made it really hard to actually have any reason to keep it around. But there was this cool idea that DJB kind of talked about in there, which he called the DNSCurve forwarder, which was an idea that you could encrypt the DNS at the last mile, forward that off, and offer some privacy as well as security benefits from it. So this is actually from the DNSCrypt spec of what the packets actually look like. We're using X25519, in our case, Salsa 20, Poly 1305. This is all standardized, so and signaled within the protocol itself, so you can switch between the appropriate ones. So we started working on DNSCrypt in October of 2011. Frank Dennis, who some of you may know, did a lot of the initial work on this, and still maintains the DNSCrypt proxy public open source project. We released it publicly in 2011. At that point, it was binary only, so you had to know what you were doing. Eventually, there were some UIs that came along with it, so you could have a nice, pretty way of interacting with DNSCrypt proxy on your laptop or whatever you were running it on. 2 days later was the first time that someone actually said, yeah, that's great, but not good enough. don't necessarily disagree. The article's kind of funny, but his main thing was encryption on its own is not enough. You need to do more than just encrypt it. You need to authenticate the data within it, DNSSEC or something. First open source implementation that you could stick in front of anything you wanted, whether it was a bind server or something else, was this thing called DNSCrypt wrapper, allowing anyone to be able to support DNSCrypt. We implemented a roaming client, got it out, and started using that in December. Our virtual appliance started doing DNSCrypt a few years later. That's actually wrong. DNS dist implemented support in December of 2015. Yandex announced support both within their browser and within their DNS service in March of 2016. We then got acquired by Cisco and integrated it within the AnyConnect client. Unbound added support. We did iOS support. Quad 9 added support. So where are we today? There's actually 40 providers that are doing, these are public open resolvers that are doing DNSCrypt today. Some of them you may recognize, Yandex, like I mentioned, OpenNIC, Quad 9, OpenDNS, et cetera. Some of them you probably don't know, like DNSCrypt put some TLD to here. There's about 3 million endpoints deployed today that are actively using DNSCrypt within OpenDNS's service alone, and it actually accounts for about 15% of our traffic at any given time. And I will say that's 15% of our total traffic, not the 15% of what we report on system.opendns. So then the next question everyone asks us is, well, what about DOT? What about DO? And my answer is, yeah, I've got more important things to work on first. So that's what I got. Questions?
There will be no questions.
No questions.
We ran out of time. Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
So the next speaker is Sebastian Castro and his wiki flavored flag day. You have 10 minutes.
I have 10 minutes. That's me. So hello, kia ora. I have like 40 slides, so I hope you won't get bored with me. No, that's a lie. It's afternoon, they shut down the AC, now we're all sweaty, so we'll keep it fresh and moving. So this DNS Flag Day, what happened down there in even southern than Australia, which is down under, and what we did at Internet and Set in order to go and sort of fix it. I won't explain the EDNS problem to you and what is DNS Flag Day because you all know that better than me. We measure the effects of DNS Flag Day using the DNS compliant testing tool from the ISC, thank you very much, and the EDNS compliant scanner for DNS zones from CSAT-NIC, thank you, Pisa, which makes your life much, much easier when you're scanning 700, 1 million, 2 million domain names. So our involvement is related, so sorry, I have to go and shift because kind of it's not designed for short people, this stuff. We have to go and we did the initial measurement back in July, and then we did presentations in all different conferences, both in English and Spanish. And I have to go and give kudos to my good friend Huque from .cl for getting me involved in this. APNIC also promoted our content about what is happening, so raising awareness, and we did the bi-weekly data collection for all DNS domain names in October. And then we started, which I think is the key, so this is not a technical presentation per se, it's how you can get involved a whole organization behind a communication campaign, which is, I think, is key on this. So our communication campaign involved registrants directly, registrars, DNS operators, popular domain names, and some other critical infrastructure in the country, including the government. So just to give you an idea, so between 2 data points here, July and January, the number of name servers we tested didn't change that much. So all the numbers you see are number of name servers tested. So I would like to go and share how the campaign worked out between July and January. So the light green you see there is the state of each of the 9 EDNS tests before the beginning of the campaign and then after. Some of them are really good, and some of them have quite really good improvements. So the handling of EDNS flags, OPT, EDNS TCP, which is a really good effect. But so the tool from CSAT-NIC simplifies the understanding of those stats, and it'll give you four states for each single domain name. So if it's okay, all EDNS are good. If it's compatible, none of the EDNS tests produce a timeout. If it's high latency or dead. And then you have the permissive and strict. So the EDNS flag day will set everything to strict. So you can see how the health of the .NZ namespace actually improved during those 6 months. So this orange line is compatible, and that dropped at the same rate of the OK. So domain names moved from 35 to 70% of the register were all good. So people was paying attention to the message we were telling. But you can see the two bottom categories, the high latency and dead, they don't drop a lot. That's because of the scale. So if you we go and take a closer look, not all domains that are marked as high latency or dead are there because of EDNS brokenness. So you have a lot of lame servers and broken IP addresses and name servers that are dual IPv4 and IPv6, where the IPv4 will work and the IPv6 won't, or the IPv6 will work and the IPv4 won't, and other stuff. So if we go and take a closer look to all the .NZ domain names affected exactly by the DNS flag day, you will see this blue line went from 8,000 domain names to roughly 500. So that's the benefit of the campaign, and the high latency more or less stays stable. So the people with high latency, we made this data available to registrants and registrars, indicating this is what you need to go and get fixed. So how we got there, how we got the effect of that campaign at that stage. We had involvement with the government. So there were a lot of government sites on the initial list. So we have to go and government knocked on the door. You have this problem. We have to go and chase the banks. So top of the 4 banks in New Zealand were affected, and they were fixed in the last week. We had a big consultancy company, services that with global presence, Deloitte, that was on the list. They were not aware, and newspapers. So we have to go and reach out to the newspapers. So also in New Zealand, you have the benefit of what we call the mate network. So yeah, I have a mate that works on that company that can help you out. So we start talking to known people, and they put us in contact with the right people. So order of 2 on that contact network, and also then said no. So the group of operators of New Zealand, network operators of New Zealand, have a Slack channel. So put it there. Who can go and put me in contact with someone from this domain? And actually, we got most of the progress from there. So this little visualization of white and black bars indicates, so black means a name server affected by DNS flag day, and white fixed. So you see some of them were fixed around August, some were fixed before Christmas, and some were fixed at the very last minute. And there are a few of them that were fixed and broken and then fixed again. And we have some stories in the process. So for example, we contacted one customer, and they say, oh, we're using Windows DNS Server. What can you do for us? And our answer was like, sorry, you're screwed. We contacted Mark Andrews, who's like, do you have a contact with Microsoft DNS team? And they said, yeah, I have this guy. And sort of tried to go and put things together. And it was funny because this company actually raised a ticket with the Asia Pacific Windows team saying, oh, I have a problem, I want it fixed. And the Microsoft Asia Pacific contacted us and it's like, how can you go and fix that problem for us? It's like, do you even read? We have the large DNS resolvers, so Cloudflare, Google, they were not sort of clear plans about if the rollover was being aggressive or incremental until a couple of days before. So we start rushing that with saying, you know, Google is going to be affected. That's 20% of the world. You better do something. We contacted large authoritative DNS, were some people confused, were some people using old software, the guys from the banks using DPI. It's like, I have a really modern version of this software, but it still breaks. Yeah, it's like your firewall. Test this. Oh, yeah, sorry. And then we had one email, outrageous email saying, why I didn't find out about this sooner? It's like, you run infrastructure, right? Yes. DNS is infrastructure. So we're doing you a favor here, not playing a role. And so the hard part of this was reaching the right people. And we have basically half of the team involved. So the communications team, the channel manager, the DNS, the domain name commissioner and his team to go and contact registrants. And you can see my picture was on the newspaper. We look alike, right? So that's from the major newspapers in New Zealand. We got articles around that with not my picture. So thank you, gracias, and that's all for me. Do you have any questions? No?
No questions. Thank you, Sebastian. And our last lightning talk speaker is Shumon Huque from Salesforce, and he will talk about DANE.
Hi, folks. Okay, so Sebastian complained, but I'm actually thrilled they turned the AC off. I can finally wear a T-shirt while in a tropical country. Okay, so I'll wait for my slides a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about DANE, and it's a little bit of a sad story, unfortunately. Oh, I'm supposed to advance my own slides, aren't I? Okay. So not only at OARC, but at IDS too, the topic of DANE has come up quite a bit in several presentations, as well as the hallway track. But my question is it really going to happen, or are we, in fact, deluding ourselves? So many people consider DANE to be the killer app in DNSSEC, and I know many folks really see no use for DNSSEC unless DANE happens. And in case you didn't know what it was, it's the use of DNSSEC, specifically signed DNS records, to authenticate public keys and X509 certificates and get rid of those relying on pesky certification authority system for your security. So here's an example of a TLSA record I pulled. I won't dwell on it. Here's a little bit of a timeline of the development of the DANE protocol specifications. So the original spec was in August 2012. There's been a bunch of subsequent specs around specific applications like SMTP, SRV, et cetera. And the last one is the one that I'm going to spend a little bit of a time on that actually wasn't published. It was unfinished. So the one area to date where DANE actually has had some success is in SMTP transport security. And I want to specifically call out my friend and sometimes collaborator and sometimes arguing buddy, I should say, Victor Duchovny. And he's been a Herculean force in not only the development of the protocol, but actually implementations and deployment in the field. So he publishes a monthly report on uptake of DANE in the SMTP arena. There's a link to the latest one from April, and you can see there's over 1 million domains with validatable DANE authenticated MX records, which is kind of quite an achievement. They're in certain pockets, so most of them are big mail servers in the European region. It hasn't caught on as well in America, but from what I understand, there are big mail providers in America and other places interested in this as well. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about a protocol extension that I've spent quite a bit of time working on, and this is what's called the DNSSEC chain extension. So this is a way for a TLS server to deliver its own TLSA record along with the full chain of DNSSEC records that will allow it to be authenticated in-band in the TLS protocol. so that what that does is obviates the need for TLS clients to perform DNSSEC and DANE queries themselves. And it turns out this is the only way that web browsers will agree to doing DANE. And they have some cogent arguments why they need a mechanism like this. The first is middle boxes. And this is actually, I agree, it's a legitimate problem. They often block all sorts of interesting DNSSEC stuff, DNS stuff that they don't understand. Like some of them block even text records. So what the hell is a TLSA record? I'm not going to allow that through. The other reason is latency. In order to authenticate DANE and DNSSEC record, you often have to do lots of extra queries. So web browsers are obsessed about latency, except for when they're trying to display ads and stuff for you. Then latency is fine, right? But if they're not making money, they don't want any additional latency, right? And the last one is there's no requirement to run a validating stub or have a secure connection to a validating recursor from which you can get secure DNSSEC secured responses. So a little bit of background. The original idea for DANE chain delivery was by somebody at Google who proposed a way of stapling DANE chains and certificates. And this was quite a long time ago, I think 7 or 8 years ago. At that time, there was aggressive opposition from the DNSSEC crowd for reasons I won't go into. An implementation was actually done for Chrome and later pulled and backed out and really went nowhere in the IETF because of opposition from our community. A second try was attempted, which is the thing that I was involved in, the TLS DNSSEC chain extension. You can see a link to the current draft there. Willem Turup, who is here somewhere, there he is, so he was also heavily involved, and we had collaborators from Mozilla and other places. And this was actually proposed and adopted in the IETF TLS working group, which is the first hurdle, because think about it, you're walking into the lion's den with your newfangled DNSSEC technology and telling all these web and CA people that they need to implement this thing, right? But we won that battle, and implementation was funded and planned for Mozilla, actually. And it got to the point where it was actually approved as a standards track document back in March of last year, but then a huge fight broke out. Okay, so what was the fight about? The fight specifically was about something that some segments of the DNS crowd hadn't realized until I pointed it out to them. So I feel kind of, in a way, responsible for this debacle. But really, what they wanted was complete bulletproof downgrade protection against web PKI attacks. So the problem is that it's challenging to deploy DANE in an incremental fashion while you have a competing authentication ecosystem already there. So this extension can be stripped and attacked if you are able to trick a CA into issuing you a fraudulent certificate, and you can obviate DANE authentication even if it were possible to do that. So my answer to that was, don't fight with the web people. They're not going to do your stuff. If we fight with them constantly, we can use web PKI defenses like certificate transparency, which was designed to deal with that problem. So the proposal from the DNSSEC crowd was to do pinning of the DANE extension, knowledge that the DANE extension existed. It's kind of a tofu mechanism. The problem was browsers, if you hadn't realized, hate pinning, even though they're the ones that came up with HTTP key pinning in the first place. They had horrendous experience with it. It's very hard to recover from pinning errors. So they don't want to do any kind of pinning. And furthermore, they didn't agree with the premise that DANE needed downgrade protection from PKI because they view this as a competing authentication system, not inherently better than the web PKI. So the result was there was two uncompromising sides and inevitable deadlock. There was like hundreds of messages on the IETF mailing list. Some of the TLS crowd who are not really interested in this topic, they started complaining to IETF leadership that this is tantamount to a DOS attack on the TLS working group. The draft was abandoned, so the result is effectively DANE, I think, is dead in browsers for the foreseeable future. And if you were IETF 103, which was late last year, actually that was in Bangkok too, if I recall, it was quite a sight. So one by one, the draft was abandoned, and one by one, all the browser people came up to the mic and said, no, we're done with this, we're not going to implement DANE, okay? So that's my sad story. So my personal view, so some of the protagonists in this battle may dispute my characterization of events, but I know I'm right. So DNSSEC and DANE advocacy requires diplomacy and compromise. So if you are insistent on pushing the most secure solution possible and you are unwilling to compromise, you're going to lose, particularly if you're dealing with a community that is filled with people that are inherently antagonistic to DNSSEC in the first place. So and I predicted that this thing would die and the browser people would walk away. That's exactly what happened. We also need to recognize legitimate arguments of DNSSEC critics. They often throw repeated, so when you say that DANE is better than WebPKI and DANE needs downgrade protection from the WebPKI say, hey, the entire WebPKI has moved to 2048-bit RSA certificates, and DNSSEC is littered with 1024-bit keys. This is a legacy system. This is worse than us. So that's a problem we have to address, things like that. They also do things like measure the adoption of stuff before accelerating the implementation of things like that. So their argument to me was, and actually my argument to them was, let's get DANE, let's get our foot in the door in the browser space with DANE first, and then what the browser people do is they introduce a new feature, they do a bunch of telemetry and measurements to see is there uptake of this feature? Are people using it? Are web servers deploying DANE records? Then they'll say, hey, it's happening. Our users want it, so we're going to support it. And then you can come back in round 2 and say, okay, now we can strengthen it. We can have optional downgrade protection. There's opportunities to strengthen the protocol later. So my strategy was, take baby steps. Get your foot in the door, improve it later. So that's a summary of my sad story. What's next? So it hasn't completely died. What we're going to do, it's actually funny. It actually went into the RFC editor queue, and it literally had to be clawed back and sent back to the working group. And the IETF leadership told the TLS working group, work your shit out and come to a consensus. But of course, that didn't happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the draft. We're going to go to the IETF independent stream. Sadly, it will be an informational document rather than a standards track document, but it will be published as a protocol specification. The probable first use case for this is going to be in-band DANE authentication for DNS over TLS, which I think some people at least I've spoken to are interested in implementing, right? And there may be other use cases like DANE for IMAP, POP, SMTP, etc. And lastly, things are not forever. Maybe the web browsers will reverse course in 5 years. And I mentioned 5 years specifically because that's how long it took after the original effort by Google to get the web browsers interested in DANE again. So with that, I will stop.
Thank you, Shumon.
Thank you. Should I take questions?
So that was actually the last lightning talk. So on behalf of the program committee, I would like to thank you for submitting your proposals. We hope you like the selection, and we are looking for the next workshop. And please fill in the surveys. And with that, I will just hand over the microphones, the stage to Duane and Keith to handle the DNS-OARC business. Thank you.
All right, hello again, everyone. Duane Wessels again, standing in front of you as the program committee chair, or I'm sorry, the chairman of the board. I am not the program committee chair. So thanks for sticking with us to the end of the content. We've got a little bit more for you, which is sort of the OARC update. I think Keith usually refers to this as having your vegetables. That's what you're for now. Before we get to that, though, I want to first thank our program committee. If you're not aware, they do a lot of work behind the scenes to bring us all this content. So thank you very much, all the program committee members, for doing that and for sort of running things. We really appreciate it. And in particular, we want to recognize the contributions of Ray Bellis, who was the outgoing program committee chair. He served on the committee for 3 years and was the chair for 2 years. So we've got a little recognition for him. Ray, if you're in the building, could you make your way up here? Where's Ray? Did somebody forget to make sure he would be here? Oh, jeez. Maybe somebody can find him. We'll give him, no? All right, he's disappeared on us. Well, won't he feel silly when he comes back in the room? All right, let me see. So, here's Ray's plaque. He'll get it. He'll get it when he comes back in. We'll try to get a picture with him, and if you're all here, we'll do some more applause when Ray comes back. So that's it for me. Hand it over to Keith.
Okay, thanks, Duane. We're doing a little bit of an experiment here. Survey data from the last workshop suggested that you wanted less stuff about OARC and you wanted more content on the workshop. So we've done that this time as an experiment. Oh, wait a minute, here's Ray. Ray.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray, for your service on the program committee. We really appreciate it.
I'll try and figure out how to get this home without breaking it.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Ray. So what we did this time round is that the status reports are mostly in written form, which means that the actual talks that myself and Jerry and Matt are going to give are considerably shorter. We'd appreciate your feedback on whether that format works or not. Just as a matter of interest, how many of you actually read the written reports? Okay. Okay, I'll take that as a data point. If there was a reason why you didn't, because it was too difficult, or you didn't have time, or you didn't put them out early enough, or it's TLDR, please give us feedback on that in the survey or elsewhere. Anyway,
I can comment on that. I mean, now you can give us a teaser, and then we will read the report, right, with all the details. That's what I do.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, the presentations are basically an overview of what's in there, so if you see something in the slides that you're interested in, go and read the written report, and there will be more detail. And again, we'll be happy to talk to you further about that and answer any questions that you have. So anyway, overall state of the union as far as OARC is concerned since the last workshop, which was back in October last year. What did we achieve towards the end of last year? The Amsterdam workshop was our biggest ever. It worked really well to co-locate with RIPE and also to do a joint workshop with Center. So this one's been big too, not quite as big as Amsterdam, but certainly bigger than we expected. We did a special DITL for the root key rollover. We completed work on DNS cap anonymization that was funded by VeriSign to ORSAC standard. Nick.at, our member, gave us funding to add response time indexer to the existing DSC software. And we finished the year with a budgetary surplus. We're not profit. We're not supposed to make a significant profit, but we're certainly not supposed to make a loss. So that was the second year that we've been able to achieve break even, and slightly better than break even. Other things that we've done since the start of this year, there's a new member portal. Jerry will be telling you a bit more about that, but that's an important development. The existing portal was well due for a replacement. Matt spent a week in Fremont completely rebuilding our racks in the main infrastructure. Again, he'll share a bit more about that with you. We've taken on two new things. The DNSFizz service, working with Casey Deccio on that, and also DNSPerf software with Nominum and Akamai handed the software over to us, so we're now maintaining that. Another DITL, the regular 2019 DITL data gathering was completed, and then some updates to various of our existing software tools. And then something we did in February, we had two face-to-face meetings. We got the board together at a PNIC at the start of February to do a strategy session. This is something we do every couple of years. And then we got all the staff together later on in February in Redwood City to figure out how we were going to implement the strategy. I'm pleased to see that we've got a number of new paying members. PIR have rejoined, and I'm pleased to welcome Detect Spam House as two of our new bronze members. We did an interesting thing with the UK telecoms regulator, Ofcom. They wanted access to our data set for regulatory measurement purposes, some of the things that Jim was talking about earlier, but they didn't want to become a member because they didn't want to be a member of an organization where they were potentially regulating some of the other members. So they're giving us a bronze level donation, but we're giving them supporter status for access to the data set. Toybox is a new blue member, and then 2 internet exchanges as supporters, and also NSRC are very happy to support their outreach work for developing countries. A couple of member upgrades, SIRA upgraded to silver and Akamai to gold, so it's great to see our existing members increasing their support. We lost a couple of members and half a dozen supporters, but that's not unusual. We get supporters that sign up and say, oh yes, we'll donate and we'll contribute to OARC, and then they never quite get round to it. So you can see from this that membership is steady. You know, we're somewhere over 100. But 2018, the net losses, which mostly started most of the losses were at the start of 2018. We didn't lose so many throughout the year, but there was a net slight shrinkage in the membership level. And that's one of the major things that the board deliberated on. It's like, well, we're not signing up new members, we're not growing the organization. What are the challenges here? We've seen some members get signed up, but other members dropping out. One of the main drivers in that is the consolidation that is going on in our industry sector. You know, we sign up a new member and then 2 other members decide to merge. And the industry structure is changing. There are also concerns about privacy in a post-zone GDPR world that make it a little bit more difficult to sell the case for the data sharing elements of OARC. Workshop sponsorship, it's been quite good, but it's not as easy to get as it used to be. And the other thing is, you know, we are a very small organization. We have half a dozen people, most of them are part-time. When stupid things from external, you know, the amount of time that we had to waste on visas for this workshop, for example, or when your bank decides that you aren't who you say you are, it wastes huge amounts of time. So we need to move the organization forward and develop it, but we need to be careful that our ability to do so is limited because we're a small organization. As I said, we have supporters who sign up, mostly researchers who are too busy to actually contribute in the way that they commit to. So we have to make sure that after a year that we purge these and they don't just become a liability in the organization. However, although we did not succeed in growing to the extent that we did, we've kept a pretty tight ship as far as costs are concerned. So you know, we managed to keep our costs below budget revenue. So what are we going to do about this? The board decided that you know, we're potentially heading into leaner economic times. We should be conservative. We should make sure that we don't jeopardize the organization, that we build on a stable base that we have, that we're in a position to grow the organization should opportunities come along, and that we want to keep our members happy and retain them. So one of the main things that we're going to do is diversify our revenue sources so that you know, we're not just relying on membership subscriptions in an industry where there's lots of mergers going on. So we're looking at a number of ways of, and there's more details on this in the written report, about offering new services that are useful to you as members that we would charge for, potentially unbundling some of the services that are only used by a subset of members and they would pay extra for that, and also offering new services which might be offered to the higher levels of membership. We want to improve the differentiation between membership tiers so that the members that support us more get more benefits from that, and not just the number of seats, number of contacts that you have. And also, you know, we want to make a difference to your business. We're not just here to exist. We're here to make running your infrastructure and your bottom line better. So make sure that we understand and communicate that better as well. Board also deliberated on finances. As I said, 2018, we did a small surplus, 5% surplus on just under about $750,000 revenue, very similar to 2017. We're going to try for a 5% revenue increase this year, which is reasonably modest. And the board set a longer term objective of 900,000 revenue, that same level of growth for 2 or 3 years until we get to 2021. when we'll do another strategy workshop. And the important thing is that it's not just growing the existing revenue sources, it's also making sure that some of that comes from diversified sources. And we've had targets in terms of cash reserves in the past that have turned out to be hopelessly optimistic. We would like to get to the point where we have 6 months worth of operations to keep the organization viable in the event of a crisis, or to wind it down smoothly if we decide that the organization isn't viable. But to build up to that level of reserves by 2022, we already had a reserves policy that was tweaked a little bit. And the other thing there is the deferred liabilities. So make sure that when you've paid for services, the money is still in the bank to continue these services for the duration of your contract with us. So, some of the diversified services. We've got DNS-Viz, which is the continuing, the free service that's always been there. We have had people who are interested in adding to it the ability to have an active monitoring DNS-Viz service, to potentially have a more extensive historical database. These are things that we could offer. Premium analysis resources, so that you can have access to more powerful analysis servers for working on our data. One of these is in the budget. Doing more than 2 workshops a year. There are other things that we would like to add on to workshops, things like maybe tutorials or member roundtables. And also, it's possible that you may find it useful to prepay for workshops over the course of a year rather than on a pay-per-member base, pay-per-event basis. We know a lot of you use our software. It's quite possible that some of you would benefit from being able to pay us money so that we can support the software that you use in your business. Site visits, we've experimented with a couple of times where members have invited one of our team to go to their HQ and talk to the staff. That seemed to go quite well. Again, that's something that we could do. We've generalized our portal, so it's entirely possible that the portal that we use to provide service to our members is something that we could use for other organizations that maybe want something like a membership service. The portal, Jerry will say more about this. It was a great piece of work back in its day, which was nearly 15 years ago. I'm sure it all makes you giggle when you log into the thing and you see just how ancient it is. But Jerry's completely re-implemented it. We kept the database, but he's using Flask and Bootstrap to give it a much more modern look and feel. And the more important thing is we put a much more flexible data model in there. So that will allow us to add services that are integrated into the portal. It will allow us to do new things for participant categories, not just the existing membership categories. We announced last week that it's in beta test until end May. Please give it a spin. When we get to the end of May, we'll reset all the test data, and then we will cut over to full production and get rid of the old portal. Some things on governance. The board has created 2 new subcommittees. There's an audit subcommittee because we've been using the same auditors for 10 years now. It's good practice to change your auditors every so often. We're going to try and do that in a way which makes it a bit more efficient to work with the auditors. There's a privacy subcommittee because we need to consider how data sharing works in a modern environment, and also to give us more flexibility on the infrastructure that we use. Potentially putting at least some copies of the data in some cloud somewhere and not just entirely self-hosted. A reminder that every October at the AGM, 3 of the board directors are up for rotation, and also the program committee we select on a year-to-year basis. So it's some way away yet, but if you're thinking about standing for the board of the program committee, then that's something that will happen in the last quarter of this year. Please think about it, or talk somebody else into it. Another thing that we're doing is that we're doing a bit more work on documenting the leadership roles within OARC in terms of the officers and board directors, just to make sure that we're not dependent on particular individuals too heavily, future-proof the organization. I'm not going to say a lot about the office. We need to have an office. It's a boring physical world thing. But we're going to try and migrate some of the paperwork that we do from California to where the physical office is in Indiana with me. Also, please we're still getting people paying the old bank account, so please make sure that when you pay your invoices that you follow the instructions on the invoice. The old bank is still there, but we don't like them very much. Workshops, we introduced registration charging for all attendees for OARC 29. That worked really well. It didn't impact the attendance. It meant that it had a good impact on the bottom line. This time round, we didn't need to charge because of ICANN's generosity in hosting it in this really nice venue. But the default policy of charging will be in place from OARC 31 onwards. That may vary when we get hosting arrangements like we have with ICANN. But the important thing is by doing that charging, it means that we can have more workshops per year because they become self-sustaining. Thank you for everybody who paid to attend OARC 29. It really helped with the viability of the organization. This is workshop attendance. As you can see, the trend is very much growth in the long term, but it jumps around a lot in the short term because we're rotating to different locations. This is quite an interesting analysis that we've done for the first time. This is the past 4 workshops, well, this workshop plus the last 3. And you can see that there's quite a heavy variation, dependency on where we are. There's a lot of people from in region. So I think it's still important that we continue to rotate in the region. And this is clearly a message that we also need to go to the regions where we do not typically go to, because when we do it, you can see this huge 32% Asia turnout for this workshop, which is great. So I hope those of you who have come here for the first time found it worthwhile. So we're currently doing 2 workshops a year. They're 2 days long. We co-locate them mostly with RIPE, Nanog, and ICANN. We know that saves you a lot of money and your time in order to do the co-location. It also means that we're reaching out to slightly different constituencies, not just from a geographic point of view, but also from the type of operators that we're working with. But we're doing 2 workshops a year, but we can only co-locate with 2 out of the 3 organizations we like to, and it means that every single workshop's a kind of ad hoc arrangement. What we would like to do is go to 3 workshops a year, because then we can basically say, well, in this quarter 1 we will always locate with this organization, quarter 2 with this, quarter 3 with this, but we don't want to place demands on the audience or the volunteers or the organization itself in terms of huge amounts of extra content. So rather than going to 3 2-day workshops, the intention is to go to 2 2-day plus 1 1-day workshop a year. So we're going to experiment with that next year. We'd appreciate your feedback on that. But if we can do this, it'll just make life so much easier because we'll be able to go to the organizations that we partner with and say, well, we're always going to be with you in February for the next 3 years, and put longer term arrangements in place, which makes everyone knows where they stand and makes the budgeting easier. So the next few workshops are going to be in kind of transition between the old scheme and the new scheme. For Halloween in the autumn, we're going to be in Austin, Texas. And then for next year, as I say, probably 3 workshops. We think we will probably go to Nanog in San Francisco in February, co-locate with IDS again in Paris, and then probably a RIPE in the autumn. But that is still to be confirmed. We need to talk to these partner organizations. What have we got planned for the rest of this year? New member portal will be going into service during June. There's a lot of work that Matt is doing on modernizing and automating systems management. There's all the service diversification that I talked about. Upgrading our infrastructure, both in terms of analysis capacity and also our storage architecture. It's entirely possible that we may need to make a major investment there as the existing architecture is showing some signs of age. Again, Matt has some things he'll share with you about that. I mentioned the privacy policy. Another thing we're going to do is a referral scheme, so that if you refer other organizations to us as a member, then we'll give you a discount on your membership. And also if you commit to membership for several years, then we'll give you a discount on that as well. And it's been over 5 years since we last increased our fees. So we're going to look at increasing the membership subscriptions from the 1st of January 2020, but that will just be a small inflation-based increase. We're not going to jack things by any significant degree. And then the last slide isn't for the members, this is for the other people in the room. I hope that you have found the last 2 days worthwhile and that you will consider these benefits for becoming a member. So that's my part. Happy to take a few questions, and then I'll hand you over to Jerry. He'll talk more about our software. Okay, thank you.
There we go. Okay, so I'm actually not going to talk about the stuff that Keith mentioned, because we're doing this new thing. So on Indico, on this presentation, you have the written report about the software the last half year, and you also have a lot of other slides, info sheets, and stuff. There's also a written report of this presentation that I'm also going to send to the members' mailing list later. So I'm going to talk about the member-only software survey I sent out a few months ago and the results from that. So we got 46 responses from 33 unique members. That's quite good. It was a short survey. It was on the time we actually announced, about 2 minutes. So thanks for everyone that actually answered the survey. So the first question was, what platforms do you run DNS software on? And it was kind of hard to make some conclusions out of the graph here, so I made it stacked instead. And then you can see that Linux is the majority. But something that actually surprised me was FreeBSD being so big. And of course, there's a lot of people actually running Mac, so you're going to have a lot of people running Mac. So some of the conclusion is that Linux is still the major platform we need to support. I might have to drop OpenBSD. I know I've had comments that it's good to build for OpenBSD, but it's only one person that said they actually use OpenBSD, and it's the platform that gives me the most headache when I do stuff. What surprised me also was that a lot of people are starting to use Arch, so we might need to start looking at how they do the software, the package, and all of that, and push for that. And the next question was, how do you install software? And of course, packages wins. And a thing that something I've been thinking about for quite some time is that I need to start automating the package building, because I do that manually now. And it takes about half a day to get everything built on all the different cloud-based official build platforms. So that would be nice to just have it done as soon as I have made a commit. Then we have what do you use, basically. And no surprise, really. DC, DNSCrypt, DNSPerf are the main tools. DNSGit and Drool are still kind of in development. And I'm a bit unsure what actually to do with Drool now that we have DNSPerf and we have Flamethrower and all the other performance testing stuff. So we'll see what's going to happen. The next question was DNS tab. And when I looked at this result, I just went, okay, I'm going to make a library. So I'm going to make a library just because I've been looking at the DNS tap stuff, and it's a bit hard to actually understand how you're going to use frame stream and protobuf C in a nice way. So I'm just going to make a library that can use in all the software instead. And since we actually have threaded and non-threaded applications, and I actually have another that has an event engines, then of course just going to make interfaces for all that. And hopefully someone else will think that this is nice and start using and maybe contributing. So the next question was visualizing DSC data. And I'm really happy that so many actually said they use Grafana, because I have no feedback about this. So I would really like to hear from you how you use it, how you actually have set it up, so I know, is it the correct way I've been thinking? Because when I made the guides for doing this, I experimented until it worked. I don't know if it's actually the right way to do it. So please. And there were some people that said that would like to do it, so just contact me if you need any help getting started. Yeah. And then we have a question on using ClickHouse or Elastic. And the response is quite yes on this also. So maybe this is the new hot feature to add, but I need to actually start thinking and planning and designing how this is going to work, because it's a bit tricky when DSC is summarized information already. And often in these type of systems, you provide the raw data and they do the summarizing. So I need to think about how to handle that. Then we had a question about message queue, like RabbitMQ and Kafka. I see you happy. This is actually a question from Christian Patrice at DNIC. The response wasn't yes, it was no and yes. And actually I got some feedback that it was unclear what the use case is. And you could think about it like it's a different way to move the data around. But I think, so I've asked Christian if he can actually provide some feedback to the community about how they have set this up, so other people might get the information how you can actually use Kafka to move all the information back and forth through your nodes. So I'm going to put this on hold for now. We'll see what happens. And the last one was, if I do anything of this, do you like it? And the answer was quite yes, so awesome, thank you. That's me. If you have any questions, we're going to do questions after Matt is done.
It's right at the top of that list. All right. Okay, so those of you who were here at OARC 29 will be happy to know that I'm not speaking for 45 minutes. As was mentioned, I'm basically just covering the highlights of the written report. I'm not even going to talk about all the things that are mentioned in the written report, although I feel like I was a bit over-optimistic about what I might accomplish this past winter when I was talking in Amsterdam. A lot did change over the course of the winter, and there just isn't time to talk about every single thing. So I'm just going to hit on some of the major points here. So please go and read the full report for all the details. So we did just finish a diddle collection. This is the regular annual spring diddle collection that we run every year. We got a fairly average size of collection from a fairly typical list of contributors. Not any really big changes there. The thing that's going to be a little different here is that it's going to be a little while before we release the post-processed data for researchers. We have a bit of a backlog of some operational things that need to be taken care of before we can do that post-processing work. And the post-processing itself actually takes a couple of weeks. So I'm sort of expecting that it's probably going to be early June before that data is available for people to work with. So in general, things are looking up from last fall. There's been a bunch of improvements in some fairly significant improvements in a small list of areas, and a whole bunch of incremental movement in many other things. The biggest thing we're coming up against right now is simply time, though. I'm contracted for 75% of my time. We have a fairly large number of what I call sort of fixed calendar events, things like preparing for the workshop or running diddle. And we're also still struggling with a bunch of unplanned incidents that crop up. And I'm trying to balance those things against each other and also still get work in that's designed to reduce the number of incidents, the number of problems we have. Unfortunately, that means that sometimes things that are broken are staying broken longer than I would like because there are other things that have to be dealt with first. I hope we're striking the right balance there. If anyone has any comments on whether we're doing that well or poorly, or please let me know. So one of the things big things that happened is a complete rebuild of our internal monitoring. The older system was inconsistent in what it was monitoring from system to system, inconsistent in the way it was configured, which made adding in new things complicated. So I rebuilt it completely using Isingo, which is a fork of Nagios, which some people are probably familiar with. And we went from having a couple of dozen servers being monitored and somewhere in the neighborhood of like 36 services up to what you see listed there now. It's 49 hosts, which includes our physical hosts as well as a bunch of VMs and a little over 300 services now. I'm expecting that by the time I'm done adding new things, which have never been monitored in the past, we'll probably be up around 1,000 services being monitored. There are those two critical items that are showing up there are some checks that are failing because of an ACL that needs to get updated that I just haven't got around to yet. Also on the subject of cleanups, we did a complete rebuild of the data center, which was basically unracking everything in the data center and putting it back often in a different place, redoing cabling. We also replaced the 3 aging HP switches we had with some new Junipers, which are much faster. I can actually SSH into them now. We got a bunch of benefits out of this. The main points here were to do things like rebalancing power. We had a bunch of cases where we were using nearly 0 power in one cabinet, and then we're right up against the wire in the one next door, and a bunch of places where we were actually running power cables between cabinets in order to get power. And so that stuff all got cleaned up. And the end result is we actually have a much better layer 2 infrastructure now with the new switches, and it's much easier to get work done in there. I'm not embarrassed to send in remote hands anymore, that sort of thing. So this is the old lab, which hasn't been used in a long time. It was actually powered off when I took over a year ago. So that got recycled, which freed up a bunch of space for us. So that's those 2 photos there, what that looked like before and after. It was removed from cabinets. We also had these problems of cabling messes and things. And so that has been changed now to this. So we have a lot of much cleaner cabling and things are labeled properly and stuff like that. So it's much easier to do work in there now. Oh yeah, so on the subject of cleanup, I meant to have another slide in here, but neglected to add it. There's, for those who are using the analysis servers, we have some software and policies in place, or processes in place to deal with setting up logins on the analysis systems that should link those logins back to users in our portal, so that when there are issues and things like that, we know who to contact. And also because the membership levels that members pay for are tied to number of accounts they get and how much access to data and things we get. But there have been a bunch of cases where not all of those processes were followed properly, and there are a bunch of users on the analysis systems that either don't match back to a portal login properly, or in a way that can be easily linked. There are others that I can't trace back to any individual person at all. There isn't enough information there for me to even figure it out myself who it is. And we're trying to introduce some more automation in there, which means that all this data needs to get cleaned up so that the logins on the analysis systems match the logins in the portal properly. So I've already cleaned up a bunch of these. There are a few more that I have on my list to get done in the next couple of weeks, but there are a very small number where I do not know who owns the analysis system login, and I'd prefer not to just delete those. So if you have an analysis server login and you are in one of these two categories, please get in touch with me. Users whose analysis server username does not match their portal username, or if you have an analysis login and no portal username at all. I'd need to speak to you if you're in either of those categories. So for a lot of those, I'll be reaching out, but just in case you're in that category of ones that I can't figure out, please come and speak to me sometime in the next week or so. Email's fine. So there's the new to OARC DNS Viz service. So I'd really like to thank Casey and VeriSign for their previous work on this. Casey for developing this in the first place and for supporting it for so long, and VeriSign for providing the hosting for this for several years, and as well for donating hardware to us when the service was moved over for OARC to take it over. So the hardware was actually delivered to us in February, just before I did the re-racking of all the equipment in Fremont. We had basically we were running out of time there, and so I got the hardware racked up and powered and connected and fully expected. We needed to do a rebuild of the RAID on the database server in order to set up something a little more space efficient than what's there now. And I fully expected to be able to do this remotely, but it turns out that the HP servers that are there are slightly more difficult to deal with in terms of their remote console than the Dell stuff that we're used to. In both cases, the older servers all depend on Java frameworks that don't work in any web browsers anymore for these remote consoles. We have workarounds that work for Dell, for the older Dell ones that don't support HTML5 yet. It turns out that these HPs only actually support .NET now for access, I just have not had time to get all the stuff set up that I need in order to access this remotely and do the work. So that's really high on my to-do list to get this database back online so that we can get the historical functions of DNS-Viz functioning again. I know a lot of people use that. I use that, and it's very inconvenient that it's not there. So that's really high on my list to get onto as soon as we're done with the workshop, basically. In addition, I think Keith mentioned some of this. We're looking at some ways to improve the DNS service even further. One of the things that we're looking at is the possibility of doing sort of a subscription-based monitoring service based on DNS-Fizz and some other monitoring tools where we could do proactive alerting to people of issues with their zones. Our file servers, we do an annual upgrade of disks on, we basically pick the file server with the oldest set of disks and do a swap out of those drives, partly to increase our available space and partly to remove older hardware before it fails. So FS5's Pool 5B is due for that this summer. So we'll be swapping out the 4 terabyte drives that are in that server with 12 terabyte drives, and which will increase that file system from the 80-ish terabytes that it is now to 125 terabytes. The thing that we have not been doing regularly is upgrading the other supporting hardware in the file server infrastructure. So we have a bunch of cases there now where motherboards are aging. We had the power distribution unit in one of them fail this winter, which took FS4 down for about a week while we tried to sort that out. The issue there is we have redundant power supplies, but there is a power distribution unit that sits between the power supplies and the motherboard, which failed. And so when one of the power supplies went down, instead of just switching over to the other power supply, it took the server out. So we had to do a chassis swap on that machine while I was working in Fremont in February. And we have other issues that are cropping up that are related to the older hardware. Not just with potential failures that are cropping up, although we do have a few things that I need to investigate right now with very strange behavior that looks like failing hardware. But we also have issues with doing upgrades now on some of those things. Because of the size of the file systems that we have there now, we need to increase the amount of memory in order to improve caching. We use ZFS for most of these file systems, and it is very memory hungry. And there are a few cases there where we literally cannot buy the memory that we need to upgrade those servers because the memory sticks themselves are so old you just can't get them. And there are other cases where we're running into price issues due to availability. Anyway, this all boils down to a bit of stuff I'm going to talk about in a minute. But this is also affecting our ability to get certain operational things done, like the diddle processing. The report details this in a little more, but I have this series of hardware issues that I need to deal with. Which are sort of all interdependent, which need to be dealt with before we can move on with things like processing diddle. So related to that, I spoke about this a little bit in the fall. With all this stuff that's been cropping up, I'm more convinced now than ever that we really need to re-engineer how we're doing our file server infrastructure. I'm going to be doing, over the next couple of months probably, certainly before it comes time to budget for 2020, I'm going to be modeling what it would look like if we were spending all the money we need to spend to properly maintain our file server infrastructure as it is every year, versus what it would take to replace that with a slightly more modern architecture using some sort of clustered file system or something like that. I expect that doing this will be a hit to our capital budget for a year, maybe two, but that hopefully the modeling will show that over the longer term it will be less expensive to maintain. So that's going to be a thing that I'm going to be looking at soon. As we mentioned, there's a full report. There's a link here to the meeting materials where you can find the written report that goes with this. Now we're going to move on to questions, but I'm going to start by actually asking a question of my own. With the new portal that Jerry's been working on, that we're planning to bring into service towards the end of the month, there's one thing that we deliberately left out of it, which is the viewer for the DSC data that is submitted to OARC by members and other supporters. Over the last few years, the number of people submitting data has been on the decline, and so has the number of people actually viewing the data. So at the moment, when the new portal goes online, we won't have a way for people to view that data. And my question is, should we continue to support this? Should we set up a new viewing service, maybe based on Grafana, something like that? Or is this something that we do people need it? Is it useful? Or is this something that people don't really care about anymore and we should shut down? If you have any comments on that, I'd like to hear about it. Or if you have any other questions for me and Jerry for our reports, please come forward.
So, Hazel Smith again. I'm going to start with my question for you, Matt, which is kind of a suggestion.
Sure.
You mentioned about Unix logins, I presume it was, to these systems not always being traceable back to customer accounts. Mm-hmm. Have you considered using, OpenSSH has a feature called SSH CA certificate, so it's nothing to do with X509. You can basically produce a cert that says that a trusted key signs someone else's public SSH key to give them access, but you can time limit it. You can specify what accounts they can log into and so on. So you run a little CA thing on your system where someone has to log in, say to the portal or whatever, and say, I'd like a cert, please. And they get a file that's good for like 24 hours or a week or whatever your policy says that says they can log in as Hazel at whatever. And then they load that into the SSH agent along with their usual key. And that lets them log in, but it doesn't require you to put a file or a line in the authorized keys entry. And then 24 hours later or whenever, their access stops working. And if they want to renew it, they have to go and get another one. Now, you can get tooling to automate logging in and getting this, but the point is that you aren't leaving bits and pieces sort of scattered across a bunch of servers. You're centralizing the ability to control that access, and you're sort of giving these leases out. You can also use revocation lists. So when, for example, a member stops paying or something, you can sort of claw back that access with a single CRL push. And you can also use that as a way of enforcing things like minimum strength requirements on keys, that the private keys haven't appeared in GitHub, that they're rolling their key material over frequently enough or whatever, Have you considered that approach?
Nothing quite that heavy. That sounds really interesting, but I think it might be a little overcomplicated for our needs.
Sure. I mean, there's some good open source tooling I'd be happy to point you at, but...
Yeah. The issue I have here is not so much one of needing to control people's access more. It is literally the need to have a username or a UID match something back in the portal, just so that I can say, that login on the server belongs to that user in the portal, which we should have, but because there have been some gaps in process following in the past that they don't match, there are a few that don't match at the moment.
So this is pure legacy cruft rather than kind of an ongoing challenge, you think?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just cleanup process, just a cleanup operation. Yeah.
Okay, my other question was I'm terrible with names, I'm really sorry. You mentioned the builds not being automated for your tools. Would you be likely to accept a pull request if I were to submit some scripting or something for that?
The thing is we run our own platform, so we have, I think it's 5 different OSs running in virtual machines, and I'm using BuildBot to auto-build on that, and I'm just going to use BuildBot to, when the build is done, they're going to go up and actually start making the packages either on those systems, or if there's good enough APIs and I have the time to write it, I'm just going to start using the public services that, like Launchpad, Copper, and stuff like that.
Okay, thanks.
Včelák, just a quick note. The new portal actually uses email address as a login, and there is no login whatsoever.
Yeah, that's right, and this is part of why we need to clean this up right now. Is that so? In the old system, the portal login username matches the analysis username. We're changing that mapping so that it will actually be tied to a UID that's assigned by the new portal. It is eventually all going to be automated, so that changes in the portal to having users added, things like that will change password, things like that will propagate out to the analysis systems. But in order to get there, I need to clean up this data so that things match, and we're able to, and that when we do the import into the new portal, we're able to do it in a way so that things still match up.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Makes sense. Thanks for the hard work.
Yeah, I can just expand a bit on that. So the new portal, why I wanted to disconnect the username is because the username now is the username you get on the servers. And we want to have like module services within the portal. So that's why you try to remove that. And this also open up the possibility to have a portal account without having an analysis account and stuff like that. So we can have different types of logins for the portal. Like they're not called users anymore, they're called contacts. So that's why. Okay.
Okay, no more questions? Okay, in that case, we've managed to finish almost exactly on time. So really appreciate the efforts of all our speakers and the program committee to keep everything on time. It's that point in the event where we get to thank everybody who made it happen. The list is always long. It's great to have such an engaged community. I look at the room and I think about how many of you sitting there have actually contributed actively to the past couple of days. It's awesome. So again, a big thank you to all our speakers. Our speakers come here on their own time and expense. And a thank you to our sponsors. Again, ICANN for paying nearly all of our actual costs and hosting us in this really rather classy hotel in a great setting. And not just for covering our costs, but also to the ICANN events team who've all been really helpful and provided all the network and AV facilities and helped us out in all kinds of different ways. Our other sponsors, VeriSign as our patron for both our workshops this year, APNIC as the sponsor of this workshop, Diamond Key as a sponsor of this workshop, and also THNIC for their local support and help with all kinds of aspects, including pointing us at the social event last night. Program committee, we've all worked really hard to put the program together. All the other volunteers that help out with things like the webcast and social media. And also, you the attendees. I know it was for many of the usual suspects of the DNS community, this is a bit further than you would normally travel. So thank you for making the effort. And also for your patience with the whole visa uncertainty that we had. So really, yeah, please just join me in thanking everyone for and then just a few announcements. You'll see the links to the surveys. As the team, we appreciate the feedback on the logistics so that we can make the meetings work better in future. The program committee really appreciates the scoring of the presentations because that helps make sure that the content that they're rating matches with what you want to hear. So you'll find the surveys, there's QR codes and URLs on the slides. You'll also find a link to them on the main Indico homepage for this event. And OARC 31, as I say, it's in Texas in the autumn. The call for presentations for that will open next week. And then we will open registration hopefully by the end of the month. And we don't need your badges back this time either, so feel free to keep these. And we'll join you in Austin for another jumbo helping of DNS content. So thank you, and see you all next time.